You're standing in line at the coffee shop. The guy in front of you orders a $9 oat milk latte, taps a black card without looking at the total, and walks out talking loudly about the new car he's picking up this weekend. Behind you, a woman in scrubs orders a plain coffee, counts out exact change from a coin purse, and says, "Thank you twice." You'd bet money on who has more of it. Money you don't have, if you're honest. Money that's been quietly telling you something for months while you kept reading everyone else wrong. This is the story of how you found that out. And it starts with a man named Arthur, who sat 3 desks away from you for 2 years before you ever really saw him. 1 o'clock. The man nobody noticed. Arthur brings the same lunch every day, a sandwich in a paper bag, folded at the top the way a kid folds a note in class. He drives a 2011 Honda Civic with a crack in the windshield he's never bothered to fix. He wears the same 3 sweaters on rotation, and once, when someone in the break room joked about it, he just smiled and said, "They still work." Nobody at that office thought about Arthur's money, because nothing about Arthur suggested there was any to think about. He was just the quiet guy who remembered everyone's birthday and never complained about the thermostat. Then the office pooled money for a coworker's medical emergency. The goal was $8,000. Arthur waited until the fundraiser had been open 2 days, watched it crawl to $2,300, and then quietly wired $6,000 himself. No announcement, no name attached, until the organizer let it slip by accident. Arthur just kept eating his sandwich the next day, like nothing had happened. You went home that night and sat with it, the way you sit with something that quietly rearranges what you thought you understood. The assumption you'd been carrying, that money announces itself, that you'd know it when you saw it, had just been proven wrong by a man in a windshield-cracked Civic. Here's the part that's hard to sit with. You're not wrong that real money is out there, close to you. You're wrong about where it's sitting. Roughly 1 in every 12 adults in this country is currently sitting on a net worth of $1 million or more. That's not some roped-off category reserved for people in magazines. That's the guy with the cracked windshield. That's the woman with the coin purse. The wealth is there. It's just wearing an old sweater instead of a watch. What actually unsettles you isn't that Arthur had money and you assumed he didn't. It's that you'd built an entire reading of people, coworkers, neighbors, strangers in line, off a signal that turns out to mean almost nothing. The car, the lunch spot, the vacation photos. You'd been grading everyone on a curve that has nothing to do with what's actually sitting in their accounts, and you never chose to grade that way. You absorbed it from every ad, every feed, every image that ever taught you what doing well is supposed to look like. So you decide to run your own experiment, except you run it backward. You go to a dealership on a Saturday, telling yourself you're just looking. A salesman named Marcus hands you the keys to a black SUV, and within 90 seconds you're picturing yourself pulling into the office lot next to it parked out front, like it's yours already. Marcus talks about lease terms while you grip the wheel. Then he says a number the way you'd mention the weather. $700 and some a month. That's roughly the average new car payment in America right now, and it has never been higher. You sit in the warm leather seat and feel your stomach do the thing it does when you check your account before payday and already know the answer. You leave without signing anything. Marcus looks disappointed, but not surprised, like he's watched this exact scene play out 100 times. That night, you open your laptop and put 2 numbers side by side. A new car in America right now averages just under $49,000. A basic, reliable new sedan, the kind of car Arthur drives if his Civic had been bought new, costs closer to $24,000. The gap between those 2 numbers is nearly $25,000. It doesn't feel like $25,000. It feels like a rounding error, the difference between a fine car and a nicer one. But money doesn't care how a number feels. It only cares what you do with it. You run the number through a compound interest calculator. $25,000 invested instead of driven off a lot, growing at roughly the long-term average return of an index fund, call it 8% a year, sitting untouched for 30 years. The number that comes back is over $250,000. You read it twice. Not because the math is hard, but because you're doing a second calculation in your head at the same time. What that $250,000 would actually mean. A down payment on a home you're not sure you'll otherwise afford. Years shaved off a retirement that currently exists only as a vague, anxious idea. Room to breathe, which is exactly what you almost traded for heated seats and a badge on the hood. 3 weeks later, your dryer dies. Not dramatically, it just stops heating one Tuesday, and the repair estimate comes back at $480. You don't have $480 sitting anywhere convenient. You have $310 in checking and a savings account. That's never seen more than a few $100s at once. So you do what nearly half the country would do in the same spot. You put it on a card. It goes through, and you exhale the way you do when a problem gets pushed a little further down the road instead of solved. Here's the thing about that $480 sitting on a card at today's typical interest rate, a little over 22%. It doesn't stay $480. If you only send the minimum payment, because the minimum is what fits, that balance drags along for years and pulls hundreds more dollars behind it before it's gone. Money that buys you nothing. No dryer, no peace of mind. It just evaporates into the space between what you owe and what you can afford. The average household carrying a credit card balance right now owes north of $11,000. Not $11,000 of vacations. A lot of it is exactly this. A dryer. A dentist appointment nobody budgeted for. Life. Arriving on a Tuesday with a bill attached. That's the part that sits with you the longest. Not that you got unlucky. What sits with you is how thin the floor is underneath an ordinary life. One appliance, one bad month, and suddenly you're not just short on cash. You're short on cash and paying rent on the shortage every month until it disappears.